Hi everyone, it's Lindy on here from Pink Whisper Designs. Today I thought we'd make this Lucky Clover Impresslits card using some products from the Holtz collection. So let's go ahead and get started. So to create the card base, we're going to be using the Strathmore Bristol Smooth 100-pound cardstock. And I've cut a piece that measures 4¼ by 11 inches. And I'll go ahead and score that at 5½ inches. So that's going to create a standard A2 size top folding card, which will be 4¼ by 5½. Now I'm going to die cut from the Holtz Sizzix Thinlits. This is called Festive Repeat, and I'm going to grab this one here. And it's not going to die cut the frame out, it's just going to die cut the inside portion. It's really like the negative of the die. So you'll see here in a minute what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and place that off to the right hand side of the card, just centering it from the top and the bottom. And then I'm going to open up the card and place it in my die cutting machine. I'm going to go ahead and run that through a couple of times. And now you can see that it's die cut out all those little areas there, all those little openings. So I'm just using my pick tool just to pop those out. And now we have that die cut right out of that card panel. Now this is designed to do a repeat pattern. So if you want to repeat that more than one time, you can easily do this with these dies. So I want to have some green cardstock showing through that opening. And I've selected the Lawn Fawn Cilantro 100-pound cardstock. And I'll just cut this down to size. So I'll cut this at 5¼ by 4 inches. And that's going to fit on the inside of our card and leave a little white border all the way around. So to attach this, I'm using my iCraft Ultra Bond adhesive. And this goes on clear and dries clear, and it's a nice strong adhesive. So I'll place some of that glue all the way around the back. And the reason I'm using the glue is it just gives me a little time to move this around if I need to. I want to make sure it's centered really well. So now you can see that pretty green shows through that little opening there. So I've got some scrap paper here. I've got my Twisted Citron Distress Oxide ink, and I'm placing it on my We Are Memory Keepers silicone mat, just so that the ink pad won't move around when I'm applying the ink to my brush. And I'm using the Hero Arts blender brush to do my blending here. And so I'm going to go all the way around the edges of this. And now I want to spatter this front panel as well. So I'm keeping that scrap paper in place. I'm placing a little bit of that Twisted Citron ink right on my glass media mat. Going to spray that with a little bit of water from my Distress sprayer. And again, that just has water in it. So I'm going to go ahead and spatter this entire panel. Now I want to set that aside to dry completely. Once that's dry, I'm going to spatter this again. And this time I'll be using the Rustic Wilderness, which is a really beautiful dark green color. So again, I'm placing that on my glass media mat. I'm spritzing that with a little bit of water, and I'll go ahead and spatter this panel. So now I'll set that aside to dry, and I'm grabbing my 3D Impresslits. This is called Lucky Love. And you can see that it die cuts and embosses all at the same time, which is what I really love about these. So I've got another piece of that cilantro cardstock. I've placed it inside that embossing folder. So to run this through my die cutting machine, I'm going to just use a piece of 100-pound cardstock. So I've got my platform, the embossing folder, and that one piece of 100-pound cardstock. And this worked well for me, but you do want to use the instructions for your specific machine to run this through. And you don't want it to be too tight. If it's too tight, just back it out and try again with either a little bit less paper. If it's running too easily, you might want to grab another piece of cardstock. So again, play around with that until you get that right sandwich. So now I've got some lime tinsel embossing powder from Ranger, and this is just beautiful. So I'm going to emboss this little Impresslit, and you can see how pretty this is. It's got all this beautiful dimension. I'm pressing on that Versamark ink all over the top so that we can go ahead and emboss this. So I've pressed it down into those crevices really well. Now I've got my Nuvo dual tip spoon here, and I'm just going to sprinkle on that embossing powder, and I'm going to just tap off any excess, and then I can go ahead and emboss this. Now when you're embossing with the Tinsel embossing powder, it is plastic. The tinsel is a plastic, so you don't want to overheat it. So what I'm doing here is I'm just heating up my heat tool before I go to the cardstock. I want to make sure that it's nice and hot, and then I'll go to the cardstock and do my embossing. And again, you don't want to overheat that. So once that's all set, let me give you a closer look at how beautiful this is. And even with that embossing powder on it, we keep all that beautiful detail. Now let's go ahead and die cut some leaves and flowers, and I've selected a few here. And these are from the Holtz Sizzix Thinlits Funky Floral number 3 set. And I'm grabbing the Lawn Fawn sticky note cardstock. So I'm going to die cut some of the flowers and the little berries out of the yellow and the greenery out of that cilantro cardstock. So I'll die cut quite a few of these pieces, and I'm using my Sizzix Sidekick machine to do this die cutting. So now I've got all these little pieces die cut. I'm going back to that Rustic Wilderness ink pad, and I've got a little sponge dauber, and I'm going to add a little shadow around all of these leaves. And that'll just give a little bit more interest to these. And then also on these little leaves that are going to have the berries on the end, I'm going to add a little shadow here as well. And then I did die cut later on one more of these. I had only die cut the one, but later on at the very end, you'll see that I add one more of those. Now we do want to add a little shape to these leaves, and you can also add those little centers to the leaves. I'm going to skip that for now. We're going to do some sculpting. I'm using my sculpting mat to do that, but first let's add a little bit of shadow around the edges of these flowers, and I'm using the Distress Oxide in the dried Marigold. And I'm just going right around the edges there. And I'll do a little bit on these berries as well, just right around the edges, just to add a little shadow. So let's go ahead and glue those berries right onto these stems. Again, I'm going back to that same glue that I used before. And I was having a hard time holding on to these, but I'm just going to go ahead and attach each of these using my tweezers. You could also use a little pickup tool as well. So now let's add some dimension. As I mentioned, I'm going to grab this little sculpting mat, and you get a couple different tools with this set, and you also get some scissors as well. And I'm using this little pointy one with the little curve on the end to create some little veins down the center, and then I'll just squeeze those together just to give them a little bit more dimension. And I will list and link all the products I'm using today down below and also on my blog. So here again, you can see I'm just using the ball tip of those tools. For the flower, you can just press around a little bit and then press down in the center. And that will give a lot of dimension to these little flowers. So I did that for all of these little pieces. So I've placed this in my Wendy Vecchi Make Art station, and I'm just using those magnets just to hold this in place while I figure out what my layout is going to be. So I know that approximately where I want that 4-leaf clover to be. So let's go ahead and start adding some of these pieces. Now I'm going back to that same glue, and I put a little bit on here, and you'll see here in a minute that I realize that I have to be careful here because that glue might go through to the inside of the card there in those little openings. So what I'm going to do is just place a piece of scrap paper here so that when I start gluing these down, they don't get attached to the inside of the card as well. And you do want to be kind of careful where you're putting the glue here. But I'll show you a little tip later on of how to fix that. If your glue did go through to the other side, I'll show you what you can do to take care of that. So a little tip for laying out the design is go ahead and put everything in place without the glue. Just lay it all out exactly the way you want it, and then take a photograph of that with your phone. So once you take that picture, then you can go ahead and follow along with that photo. Just place it alongside your project and follow along. Just makes it a lot easier, because once you start taking it apart, sometimes it's hard to remember how you had it laid out. And that's what I did here. I have my camera off to the side there, or my phone off to the side there, and I'm just following along. So here again, I'm adding a little bit more shadow to some of these pieces. I just wanted a little more contrast on these leaves. So you'll see here, I decide at the very end to add a little bit more greenery off to that right-hand side. But at this point, I just wasn't sure what it was missing, so I continued putting it together, and then I let it sit for a little while, and I came back to it and was able to determine what else I needed. I wanted to have this a little bit popped up, but I knew that that four-leaf clover was going to show through from the inside, so I die cut a second one out of that cilantro green paper. And now I'm just going to glue that down, and I'm just putting that glue on those little areas there and a little bit on the four-leaf clover. I just don't want too much glue to go through to the other side. And then I'll just hold that in place for a minute, and then I'm going to pop it up. So I'm going to apply my foam mounting tape here in between the two layers. So that'll give me the dimension that I need without that tape showing through the inside of the card. So this is a good way to hide that foam tape. And so when we look at it from the inside of the card, all we'll see is that pretty green four-leaf clover. So now that we have that popped up, I'm going to grab from my Pink Fresh Studio Essential Jewels Mix, which you guys know by now that I absolutely love. I'm going to grab this really pretty, kind of an emerald green color. And I'm going to add some sparkle to the centers of each of these flowers. And what's really nice about these jewels is you get 3 different sizes. You get a small, medium, and a large. And I'm just using my Marvy jewel picker to pick those up. And then I decided to lay out some more of those jewels kind of around that flower arrangement. And a couple up there at the top. I'm going to put a few up on the top right-hand corner of the card as well. And this is going to add a lot of sparkle and a lot of interest. So I laid all those out, and then I went ahead and glued everything down, and I'm going to put one of those bigger ones, that largest one, right in the center there. So now I've got a piece of green twine. I cut 2 pieces of that twine, and I made a bow, and I'm just gluing that in place. So now there you can see where any glue that might be showing through, I've got my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to add plenty of that powder there, and that's going to take away any stickiness that might have come through the card. And then I've got my Nuvo Surface Sweep brush, and I'm just going to brush away any of that excess powder. And here's, as I mentioned before, that little extra greenery I thought it was missing off to the side here. So I'm going to go ahead and tuck that in. And then that just finished it off. So I'll add my sentiment. This is from the Lawn Fawn Love Poems stamp set. And I'm going to grab those 2 there that say, "I'm lucky to have a friend like you." So let's grab this little banner die. This is from the Lawn Fawn Flippin' Awesome die set. And this creates this cute little flip card, but I'm just going to grab that banner because it's going to fit these sentiments perfectly. Now I was going to stamp them in my Misty stamp positioner, but I decided it'd be easier to die cut the banners first and then go ahead and do my stamping. Now, you could certainly cut these banners with your paper trimmer if it's easier, or if you don't have a little banner die like this. Either way works just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and stamp I'm lucky to have, and I want to stamp that off towards the left-hand side because we're going to be cutting away that right-hand side. And then for this second one, I'm going to stamp that right in the center of this banner. Now I'm going back to that little sponge dauber and that Rustic Wilderness ink, and I'm going to go all the way around the edges of these two banners. And then here you can see I'm going to cut away that right hand side, and I'm tucking that right into that floral arrangement. And I'm going to go ahead and glue that down. And then for this one, I want to avoid that opening of that window. So I'm going to place it down towards the bottom here. You could place it off to the left-hand side like we did on the front, but I'm just going to center it down at the bottom. So when you're signing this card, you do want to be careful where you sign. Off to the left there would work just fine. So just be careful. You don't want that to show through that little opening. So let's take a closer look at the finished card, and we've got all this beautiful sparkle. I love that embossing powder. It's just so pretty. And then the sparkle from our little gems. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, please hit the like button and subscribe. And don't forget to hit that notification bell so that you don't miss a single video. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.